Welcome to the Bookman's Corner. I'm Lois Lindstrom. Our guest today is Rochelle Louis Coetzee, who grew up in South Africa and moved with her family to the United States in 1993, and she founded a thriving film and video production company in Fort Lauderdale. Whenever she met a new person in the United States, they always ask her, what was it like in South Africa? The result is her new book, Pulani, a memoir of a young woman in Apartheid South Africa. Raised by a wealthy father and dynamic mother in an affluent household of a small South African town, Rochelle was a proper English girl. But she married at 17, had a baby, attended school part-time, and worked in a country with many international headlines regarding its crime, its corruption, and shantytowns, and, of course, incredible mineral wealth. Many Americans have new perceptions of South Africa now. We've been impressed with the way the country handled the World Cup, a major international soccer tournament, and many of us watched and marveled at the 2009 film Invictus. This film, which depicts the 1995 Rugby World Cup, showed the world that race relations between blacks and whites in South Africa had vastly improved. Rochelle, welcome to the Bookman's Corner.
Thank you, Lois.
And I just loved your book, and I really want to know, so let's talk about the title, because what did Pulani mean to you?
Okay, well, Pulani is actually my Sotho name, which means rain, and translated loosely means happiness because the crops grow. It was given to me by the head cook, Evelyn, who, according to the tradition of the household, is that the baby is named also in the language of the tribe that is there. So being Sotho, it was Pulani. So
that is an African tribal name then?
Right.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
And also, I thought that what was interesting in this book is that you describe what was happening to you chapter by chapter, but in the beginning of each chapter, you give a little history lesson of what was taking place politically, like whether it was 1971 or 1975. And what made you think of doing this?
Well, I wanted to write the book where it shows really my life growing up in South Africa, but so many people didn't know what the political situation was like. So the method of doing it like that was to show how divorced I was from the situation politically that was going on growing up as a child, and then how it sort of like towards the end, the political situation blended in with my life.
I see.
At the end.
So you felt you had a really safe and secure childhood as a small child and a schoolgirl, right? I mean,
I knew no danger.
Okay.
I knew no fear.
Okay.
I knew nothing. It was a very bucolic childhood.
Okay. Now, tell me about your ethnic background, because your family was from France, right?
I have a multicultural background.
Okay.
My grandmother from my mother's side is Jewish.
Okay.
My grandfather from my mother's side is Lebanese.
Okay.
From my father's side, I'm French and Lebanese on that side as well. So yes, maybe I'm ready to do the peace negotiations in the Middle East.
Exactly. So, but your grandfather then immigrated, from Lebanon to South Africa? Then?
Correct. They all immigrated from Europe during the early 1900s to South Africa, at different times, but yes.
Okay. And now, what makes up the white population of South Africa? I thought it was mostly Brits.
Well, a lot of people think that South Africa's white population is made up only of the English-speaking Englishmen, which is the British, as you say, and then, of course, the
Dutch.
what they know as the Dutch,
Yes.
the Afrikaners. But no, the British, the English-speaking is made up of a multitude of Europeans, Germans, French, Eastern Europe, and then, of course, the British, and then the Afrikaners was primarily Dutch.
So it's very international then?
It was a very European
style country, okay.
Well, it was a European style living. So a lot of the European traditions and behaviors were transported to the African lifestyle.
Okay. Now, what was it about Afrikaners? What were they like? How did they differ from the Brits?
Well,
the Anglicans.
Well, the Afrikaners, they're named in very different formats. You can call them the Boers, you can call them the Afrikaners, you can call them the Voortrekkers. They were all descendants of the Dutch settlers in 1652.
Oh, 1652. Ooh,
That's
a long
right.
time.
Jan van Riebeeck, on his way to the Dutch East India Company, created a trading post
I see.
in South Africa because they couldn't get through the Suez Canal. The Suez Canal was not invented those years, so they had to go all the way down Africa in order to go up to India.
I see.
So when they did that, a lot of these sailors were dying because of no fresh water. And eventually they thought it was essential to land in Cape Town.
I see. Now, when you were growing up, you had quite a number of maids and cooks and people and nannies, right? And
Right.
Were they black Africans?
Absolutely. They were of the Sotho tribe.
Okay.
Wherever we lived was really predominantly of the tribe that was in your area.
Okay.
So I grew up in Bloemfontein, and in the Free State, the Sotho tribe, the South Sotho tribe, was the very predominant tribe in South Africa at the time.
Now, were they paid a wage? Were these people all paid a salary?
Absolutely, they were paid a wage. Not only were they paid a wage, even it was much less than what Americans think of as a decent wage.
Okay.
Here in in America, they were given add-ons, which were benefits, as you would say. They lived with their household in good conditions. Yes, some of them were not, but not in my household. I'll speak only for my household. I can't speak for everybody. But in my household, my father had built several rooms and lounges and kitchens for the maids.
So they weren't living in shanty towns.
No, they were not living.
They were living nicely. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
And yes, they were given medical benefits, and my mother helped with the schooling of the
Good.
children and clothing.
Well, one thing I found really interesting was the fact that your mother oftentimes had to go to the jail to rescue one of your maids, because as they were walking about, apparently if they didn't have their ID with them, they were arrested.
Right. That was the pass laws in South Africa that were passed in the early 1940s. Where
Now that's the apartheid system, right? Because everyone had to know, it was controlling where the Africans were going. And
well, to give you a little history, after the Anglo-Boer War, South Africa eventually became a union in 1910.
okay,
So that meant less power from the British colony, because it was a colonial part of England.
Of England, yes.
Anyway, so they put into laws the segregation laws that were already in place.
I see.
So they named it differently and just made it, called it the word apartheid, because it was the Dutch, it was the Afrikaans way of saying what the segregation laws were. And in 1941, the National Party, the Afrikaners, took over from the United Party, which was the Union, and South Africa became independent. And that's when the word apartheid as a law came into place.
I see, I see. Well, what kind of
So
school?
to go back onto your story of why was the maids not allowed to walk into the streets, there was the pass laws where if you were working for a household, you could
You had more freedom then, I suppose.
well, no, you didn't have freedom as much as you could. The household person who owned the household wrote a note to go. You could go visit somebody else in another household, and then everybody else had to be off the streets, as according to the law. And not roaming around the streets. I'm talking about the black population. That was one of the law.
Tightly controlled,
By
right?
9 o'clock. There was absolutely nobody in the streets at 9 o'clock. Now, growing up as a child, I didn't know why there was nobody around at 9 o'clock at night. I didn't ask or what or anything. But we could walk freely as teenagers from one friend to another friend to another friend, and you'd hardly see anybody in the streets.
I see, I see. Well, what kind of schooling did you have in South Africa for like elementary school and high school? What was it?
Right. We had the British schooling system, and I had Scottish nuns that taught us all the way from Scotland.
Wow.
We had to wear the uniforms just like you would see in an English school.
Was it only girls then, right?
I went only to an all-girls school. It was a private school, and we had to wear the uniforms, but the nuns thought that we were in the middle of England, and as you know, the weather in England is freezing cold half the time, and South Africa is the jungle and warm. So of course we still had to wear the uniform, the pinafore and the stockings and the blazer and the blazers and the cardigan and the snood, which is the Alice band to get our hair off our face. And we were sweating like crazy. And eventually the nuns got sense into their head by the time I was in the 6th grade to say, no, I think a simple uniform would work much better. But yes, for a long time we were sweating under the African sun.
Oh, my goodness. Well, now your family is English, and then your husband's family is Afrikaan, right?
My family is European. There's no English in the English. My family is European, which is English speaking.
Right,
correct.
That's right.
And my hug's family is Afrikaans, the Dutch speaking.
The Dutch side. Correct. Okay. Mm-hmm. Were there many cultural differences between the two families?
Hugely. The cultural differences were the way we were brought up.
Okay.
In our household, we had a lot of empathy for our staff.
Okay.
In most of the Dutch households, it was more of a relationship of an employee and employer. So in our household, the staff was a lot more like the extended family.
Yes.
That was one. My mother vehemently did not agree with the apartheid policies. So she, fought against those as much as she could in her limited capacity as some socialite in South Africa.
Right.
So she did her own bit, but didn't really want me to be, quote unquote, corrupted when I met my husband into thinking that I would go into those kind of like very segregational apartheid laws of thinking. But that was never going to happen because what you think of somebody else is, unless you know them, and that was another reason why I wrote the book, was unless you know who you're talking about, you always have these preconceived ideas of what the Afrikaners were like, because I know that the Afrikaners were depicted as these very aggressive,
almost like Nazi Germans.
Yes, like almost like that.
Yes.
And that's an unfair depiction on most of the Afrikaners that were living in South Africa. Yes, you got your extreme right, and yes, you got your extreme left. But the majority, and my husband included, they were very decent, loving, family type people.
Good. Now, I thought it was so interesting in this book. You talk about when you're in high school, you and your boyfriend, who then became your husband, took an amazing trip on the continent of Africa, and you had some amazing, interesting little. You saw many countries and.
Well, forget. For instance,
but you're just a teenager.
That's what I was going to say. How the audience was, how does my mother allow me to go with my boyfriend right around South Africa, from almost hugging the coast for 6 weeks?
That's there's the map.
Yes. So as you can see, I start in the middle of the country and go all the way up to the north and hug all the way down the coastline, all the way back into Bloemfontein. That took 6 weeks on the equivalent of $400.
So you're camping out, right?
You're literally, my mother never thought that we were camping out, otherwise she would never have allowed me to go. I had said that I was going on this vacation, staying in hotels, and friends, and we'd have separate rooms. But that was the white lie that I told, just to be with this boyfriend that I was
madly in love with,
horribly madly in love with.
Yes.
At 17, he was 5 years older than I am.
Yes.
So, as you can imagine, I was totally infatuated.
Yes.
And didn't help that he was tall, dark, and good looking.
Yes.
But so I had managed to persuade my mother for me to go around this whole of South Africa in 6 weeks. This is just as I had graduated from high school.
Okay.
And I was, yes, I got pregnant.
And you got pregnant, yes. and of course,
it was a lovely, it was, which one do you want to hear? The good, the bad, or the ugly? The good was we had wonderful times on beaches and in forests and very lovely, loving times. And then, of course, growing up in a household where I never made my bed or never learned how to cook or do anything like this, here I was opening up tin cans in the middle of a pouring rain and not knowing whether, because all the labels had fallen off, not knowing whether I was going to get beef or fruit.
Right, right.
So yes, absolutely, as that was the horrible. And then, of course, the ugly was that I had missed my period. So by that time, I'd realized that I was in real trouble.
Right, right. Well, of course, what I thought was interesting was the fact that no one talked about abortion. There was like, well, she must get married quickly and have the baby. It was
well, abortion was banned in South Africa, so that was not an option.
And it wasn't. You couldn't even go into another European country to do it. I mean,
well, to go to another European country would have meant that I would have had to alert my mother as to why I was going overseas into South Africa. So no, I was in a catch-22 situation. Yes, we had thought of going to a black hospital because we had different hospitals during those times, during apartheid. There were doctors, white doctors and black doctors who were absolutely willing to give abortions to girls that were getting into trouble, quote unquote. My husband, Peter, at the time the boyfriend, did not want to hear of that because they are a very traditional family. And I didn't want to do it myself, but I was in this panic mode from my mother. What would she say? This was like a huge shame on the family as such. So yes, it was very difficult. It was a very challenging time. It was almost like Armageddon. It was at the stage of, yes, it was a lovely trip. Yes, there were some challenges in it and huge challenges. But I had even bashed into a deer while I was driving, and the deer had flown off, and I was hysterical that I had driven into and killed the deer. And then the next thing, my husband, in a culturally different way, is saying, we have to pick up the deer to make biltong. And I said, are you kidding me? I've just killed the deer. And you want me to pick it up and make biltong, which is jerky, out of it? I said, it's not happening, but somebody else had picked it up and had taken it and made jerky. So yes, there was those cultural differences that were very vibrant at the time. And but I never realized that I was so certain of myself and so innocent in the fact that I would never get pregnant. I mean, every 17-year-old is so brave and so innocent in the fact.
Well, do you have any advice to young people involved in contemplating a sexual relationship at a young age?
Oh, that's a loaded question. A good reason to why you should read the book to see how I had coped with that situation. I would absolutely recommend young girls to hold off because you're not well equipped to take that step.
And especially once you have a baby.
And once you have a baby, you have a lot of responsibilities. So the passion is wonderful. And a lot of people said, well, why didn't I take any precautions? Well, even if you do take precautions, which we did, I didn't want to go on the pill or anything like that, because then the town that I grew up, everybody would alert my mother. And then, of course, that would defeat the object of me going on the trip around the whole of the country.
That's right.
So, yeah, we used alternative methods, but yes, it didn't work.
It didn't work.
So would I recommend, if you do have the baby, absolutely, I recommend, and it's a good situation, I don't want to get into that subject, but if you do have the baby, I would strongly suggest read my book to see how I coped.
And of course, the baby's now a young woman.
The baby's a young woman, very successful. She lives in France and is doing both my children, the loves of my life.
Yes, of course.
So yes, and she's very much like her father.
Okay.
So
that's interesting. Now, but of course, when you're traveling around South Africa on that trip with Peter, were you worried about violence then? I mean, it sounded like you didn't have the concerns, because a lot of times we read about there's a lot of violent eruptions in South Africa.
Right. Well, during the trip, I was not cognizant of any violence that was going on. So I'm talking 1974.
Okay.
And yes, I'm sure there were violent incidents in South Africa, but I had grown up in this very protected environment. So my only worry was Peter, was whether he liked me or not.
Yes.
So that
Keeping him happy.
keeping him happy, that was the most important. So I was not concerned about whether some vicious person would come and attack me in the middle of the night. No, that didn't enter my head.
Right.
And with that mindset, I then, we were married, and we were at a resort with some of my husband's, now newly married, of course, and my son had been born at the time. And so we were at this resort on vacation with his business friends. And I decided to visit my mother and the household, and then my parents, with the children and my maid, Marta. So my husband had said at the time, "You take a gun." Now I was still in this mindset of, well, why should I? Nobody's going to attack me. I'm taking the children in the car and going to visit my parents. And he insisted, and to keep him happy, I said, okay, fine, put it in the glove.
Had you ever fired a gun before?
Never fired a gun. He had showed me patiently, "Rochelle, you take the gun up and you just pull the trigger. It's loaded. Just pull the trigger."
Is it like a...
It was like a pistol.
Pistol, okay.
It was like a pistol. So I said, "I'll just put it in the glove compartment." He was just afraid of me traveling as a woman on her own, all the way through the Free State, down to through Durban to the Free State. So anyway, on the way, I see a snowman. Now it's very unusual for South Africans to see snow
at all.
Never mind a snowman.
Was it artificial?
No, it was not artificial. It was very real.
Okay.
And this snowman was in the middle of a field, a farmer's field. And we were coming down the road, and I saw it, and I said, "Oh, Nikki, there's a snowman." And she said, "I want to see it." So, of course, I got out the car. This was not my husband's suggestion. He had told me, "Don't get out of the car, get right to Bloemfontein." I wasn't going to listen to that, so I got out of the car and stood at the barbed wire fence and said, "Look, there's the photograph. There's the snowman." So my daughter said she wants to touch the snowman. So I told Marta, the maid, and my young son, who was 9 months old, to stay in the car. And I helped Nicole gingerly over the barbed wire fence, and we walked a few hundred feet to the snowman. Correct. And I took the first photograph with her standing there, and I think you have the photograph somewhere. And as I was taking the second one, everything around me became very noisy. Now you must understand, in South Africa, you become very close to the earth.
Sure.
So you are nature, very aware of what's going on in your surroundings.
Right.
But the surroundings was not noisy. It was quiet, but I could hear the spirits swirling around in my face. And I looked around, and there was nothing. And I wanted to take the photo, but I couldn't take the photo. And the screaming was going on in my head. And I turned around, and I saw this truck coming with a load of blacks that I had down the hill, because we had just come down the hill and we were parked at the bottom. And in that split second, I realized that was trouble.
Yes.
Why? Because the baby and the maid was in the car, and my bag was in the car, and my car keys were in the car.
Sure.
And I was thinking, the only thing I was thinking, they were going to take the baby and the maid in the car, and here's my daughter and I on the opposite side of the barbed wire fence with the snowman.
Yeah, that's very dangerous,
so
yes.
In the split second, I realized to take her with me was not going to happen.
Right.
So I told her to stay at the snowman, and I literally leapfrogged over the barbed wire fence. I don't know where I got the energy from. And as I got to the car, so the truck with the 3 Africans in the front and 2 in the back stopped.
Yes.
Right in front of me.
Right.
So I said, "What do you want?" as I opened the car to get the gun.
Right.
And they said, "Nothing." And I said, "What do you want? What do you want? What do you want?" And the driver was coming towards me and laughing in my face and said, "We decide to do what we want."
Yes.
And my maid was screaming at the back saying, "Madam, this is not our people."
Right.
And when she said that, and I could see that, I knew it was not the tribe I was used to, and it was somebody not even from South Africa.
Right, so it was going to be very dangerous.
No, it was extremely dangerous. And the driver turned around and said, "Go fetch the little girl."
Yes, yes.
Now, I was at the car. My
Yes.
daughter was standing at the snowman
Right.
on the other side of the fence.
Right.
They would have taken her and kidnapped her.
Sure.
Used her for God
Who
knows what, raped her, whatever.
Right, right.
I was in a very difficult situation. So I took the gun out and I said, you move one instance and I'll fire a shot. Now, of course, I'd never learned how to fire. I knew that to pull the gun. And all around, the noise in my head was just screaming. It was going crazy.
Right.
And the one black man had climbed the fence.
Right.
And I shot him in the leg and he fell down onto the ground. And by this time, my daughter was just standing there. I don't know how she must have sensed that she couldn't run towards the fence and come towards me.
Right.
She just stood there like
That
a statue.
Right.
And the driver still came forward to me and looked at me and said, "You think you're brave?
Yes.
I will come towards you and take you." And I shot again, and I didn't know how to shoot, but I was in such a panic. And he looked at that, and he just turned and they ran. But
well, it's very.
it was
one of many exciting.
It was horrifying. I grabbed Nicole and we went back home, and of course, yeah.
Well, does the South African Embassy know about this book?
Not yet.
Are you planning to?
Not yet. I'm sure. Yes, everybody has been asking for it. We have sold a lot of pre-orders already. A lot of people. I've been talking about the book for a long time, since everybody's asked me to write this book, and we've already got multiple orders. And we've got a really great response from it.
And how do you feel, just real quickly, how do you feel about Mandela? Do you feel that everything is going in a positive direction with him?
Well, we had always wanted Mandela to come out of jail. Didn't matter. In the 70s, we'd always wanted Mandela to come out of jail. So we didn't know what Mandela looked like until he came out of jail. But how do I feel about Mandela? Absolutely, I have a respect for the man. He's one of the great saints of our nations.
And what about the future of South Africa? Do you think it's going in a positive direction and will be more and more accepted by the rest of the world?
Well, I think South Africa is trying to be accepted. I'm sure it is accepted by the rest of the world. But as far as the future of South Africa, I can't really say what it will do, except that the violence has increased, unfortunately. But they are very brave South Africans, and they are trying to make it work.
And so you have a positive feeling about the future of the country?
I would like to have that positive feeling about South Africa, because the end of my story is that I do want to go back and do something positive for my country.
Wonderful, Rochelle. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Please stay tuned for our next edition of the Bookman's Corner, when we'll have an exciting new author. Thank you.